I knew this day would come. Today we're venturing into the unknown. We're going to work on fourth finger vibrato. This is Daniel Kurganov. Welcome back to my masterclass series. I hope you're all doing well. First off, I'd like to extend a thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Your help has really allowed me to devote the time necessary for planning and producing these videos. If you're new to the channel, you can check out my Patreon page where I'm making other violin videos for members only and various other perks. And most of all, thank you to everyone who's been watching and subscribing to my YouTube channel. It's been about a year now, almost a year, and I never thought it would grow this big, and I just wanted to put out content that I thought was valuable as if I was writing chapters in a book. So I really appreciate your support and all of the interactions that I've been able to have. Now, my series of ultimate vibrato tips has been expanding, so we're going to go past the originally planned 15 and just keep counting. This was definitely one of the most requested videos, and as the title suggests, we're going to be working on fourth finger vibrato. Before we get into it, be sure to check out my 3 other vibrato videos, as the advice there is going to be very helpful for the fourth finger as well. One of the signs of good fourth finger vibrato is that the joints of the finger will wobble with some freedom, especially the final joint. You can certainly get away with a flatter fourth finger vibrato and sort of just power through it. But of course, this can cause tension if you do it a lot, and it basically causes you to sacrifice the position of your hand. And for one note here and there, that could be no problem. But what I found is that it exhausted my hand sooner, and it disincentivized me from even using the pinky. That, and it wasn't strong enough, dexterity-wise. And we'll get into the connection between dexterity and vibrato. For years, I really coveted how some people can play with such a round pinky, vibrating with a full swing as if it was any other finger. So over the last decade, through struggle and analysis of great players and trial and error and reading literature, I was able to come up with a few simple points that I think could be helpful. Of course, all bodies are different, and some people get away with not using the fourth finger at all. So as with everything, this is another tool in your tool chest. Some people need fewer tools. Some people love accumulating tools. So let's get started. Tip number 11 in our running counter is to enlist the aid of other fingers. Now, you can do this 2 ways: physical aid and aural aid. So aural aid means using another finger as a model to base your fourth finger vibrato on. So basically, I'm going to start with a note on fourth finger. I'm going to try to vibrate it as well as I can. Then what I'm going to do is switch very quickly to a different finger on the same exact note, and the vibrato is probably going to improve. Right? With third finger, it's going to be a little sweeter, a little rounder, juicier. I'm going to listen really closely, listen to the swing, the amplitude, the power of the impulse. And as much as possible, I'm going to try to mimic that when I go back to the fourth finger. And I'm going to do these side to side because it's important to kind of keep it in your ear. So. So I like to use that method all the time. Just in the middle of any lyrical passage, I have to play fourth finger. I'm going to stop and just go back and forth, try different fingers, and listen very, very closely. Now, the second kind of aid is the physical aid. And this is pretty straightforward. For many people, it helps their fourth finger vibrato when the third finger is also down. So try keeping the third finger down, but you have to do it very lightly. Otherwise, the whole hand gets a little bit tense and you lose that swing, right? With 2 fingers down, you have to be extra loose so that the hand can still swing for the vibrato. So if we choose a note like C natural, so I'll vibrate it without the 3rd finger. Now I'll place the 3rd finger down. Doesn't really matter exactly where, just nearby. The vibrato is a little bit tighter in a good way, a little more focused. And you could even think of it as vibrating the 3rd finger, and the 4th finger goes along for the ride. So you have to experiment a bit with that and see how it'll help you. The next tip is called use it or lose it, which means use the 4th finger every chance you get. I can't stress that enough. Now, if you don't first succumb to fear and anguish, you'll see that this endurance trick really works wonders. It's like one of those step counters. You know, every time you take a step, the number goes up, right? Every time you use your pinky, that number goes up. And look at someone's pinky vibrato or just their pinky technique in general. If they have, 2 times as many pinky uses as someone else. In fact, what I really love to do is to take lyrical passages and play them with only the 4th finger. If this is too intense for you, you can still do it, but make sure you start with a very narrow and relaxed vibrato. The goal isn't to be like super expressive at first. I'm really feeling that impulse from the arm and from the wrist, and I'm actually feeling the fleshy part of my finger kind of go back and forth, right? So when the vibrato is very fast, we don't really feel those small details anymore, and hopefully they're integrated. But doing it slower, you can just focus on those, and then paying attention to these details keeps your tempo down. It's also easier to loosen the hand, loosen the center of the palm, as I like to say. And of course, this is not limited to passages. You can do 4th finger scales, right? Playing up and down on one string with the 4th finger. I like to do broken thirds. So etc. Up, down on all the strings. The next tip is a really important one, and that is to pay attention to the shape and the angle of the various parts of your arm. So starting with the fingers, you have to be very aware of how flat your finger is. Some people are able to have a very round finger when they vibrate, and typically if you have fatter fingers or fatter finger pads, this is much easier. I like to be kind of lower, and so the finger is a bit flatter, but it's still curved. It still has some curve. It's not going to collapse completely. And it's collapsed if the joints can't wiggle. So on the flat side, and it's kind of parallel to the fingerboard this way, just rising above a little bit, right? As opposed to this, right? Quite different. Now the second thing is relating to your hand. How high is the hand? And that's, of course, related to the previous thing. If your pinky is really curved, probably your hand is pretty high. But in high positions, there are various options here. Even with the same shape of the pinky, I can have my hand a bit higher, I can have it lower. So this is a matter of experimentation and just awareness. So If I raise my hand a little bit, I lose a lot of that richness of the vibrato. If I lower it too much, it gets kind of stiff. So for me, the sweet spot is right around here. Now, staying with the hand, another thing to consider is how far back is the hand tilted. It's perfectly valid to play, with a pretty straight wrist. You'll see a lot of great violinists playing with their wrists slightly back. You'll rarely see great violinists playing like this. So this is something to avoid, even in kind of special vibrato situations. I would try not to go there. So you'll notice that the swing of your vibrato and how it sounds will be altered based on how you feel this angle of the wrist. Now if I lower it, it's a little bit faster, a little bit narrower, and there's more of the wrist involved, right? It's more of a pure wrist vibrato. I typically prefer a straighter wrist because this allows me to activate my arm as well into the vibrato. And while I really love wrist vibrato and typically prefer it, for the fourth finger, arm vibrato is very nice because you're using a bigger lever and it's easier to get a rounder and kind of heavier swing that's not prone to kind of the shakings of, different smaller muscles. So I can play a passage two different ways, once with wrist vibrato on the pinky and once with arm vibrato on the pinky, and see if you can spot the difference in color and just the overall character of sound. Finally, we want to pay close attention to the tilt of our elbow. Our elbow is going to tilt for other reasons. Like if you're on the E string, it could be a little further back. On the G, we want to bring it in. But vibrato will also cause changes to the elbow. Now, if I'm on the E string with my elbow a little bit back, the vibrato sounds like this. It's okay, it's a little wiry for my taste. Now, if I bring the elbow further in, and that's going to affect the other things we talked about. So my hand's going to get a little bit higher, and the shape of the pinky will change as well. And the vibrato, I find, really opens up. The final tip is something not to underestimate, and that is the overall dexterity, strength, and agility of your fourth finger. Practicing studies like Sevcik, Schradik, Dunis, trill etudes from Kreutzer and Don't and beyond, all of that is crucial because if practiced correctly, what you're doing is training the strength of the muscles required for sagittal motion of the fingers, which is the motion this way, while still keeping the tendons of the individual phalanxes relatively relaxed. In other words, you're doing what I've mentioned many times on this channel before, and that is articulating the fingers from the base joint, right? We don't want to be doing this. We really want to be throwing the fingers from here. This is exactly the feeling that we want in the fourth finger, right? We want a relatively relaxed finger. There are no muscles in the fingers. There are only tendons. So we don't want those tendons to be tight, but what we do want to activate are some of the intrinsic muscles of the hand. So for example, this one's called the abductor digiti minimi, and it's mostly responsible for this kind of motion. But I find that when I activate it for fourth finger vibrato, it allows me to loosen the finger and the rest of the muscles of the hand, and it kind of almost works on its own along with the larger parts of the arm. And the vibrato I get from that is, I think, the best that I can do. So it's kind of paradoxical in the end. The fingers have to be trained for precise strength and dexterity so that they can be relaxed. Otherwise, the idea of relaxation turns into this kind of mushy, inert feeling, and it's impossible to play really passionately and with great strength if you're just like totally relaxed everywhere. So that's all for part 4 of my vibrato series. I'm pretty sure there's going to be another one, so subscribe if you'd like to be notified about that. And I'd be curious to hear how you're doing with fourth finger vibrato. Is it easy for you? Is it hard? Do you have any other tips and tricks that you'd like to share? Maybe some success stories, maybe some failures, deepest secrets, deepest fears. So comment down below and let's see what other ideas we can come up with. As always, be well and see you next time.